do this without him.
Yeah, you always need that person in the background, that tech person.
And why are they always young?
They are digitally native.
Why we have 7-year-olds, you know?
We are live.
Okay.
We are live. Dick, you can
I see
start.
it coming on. There we are. Why are they always young?
They are digitally native.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Abraham's Table special online edition. My name is Richard Kubek, and I'm chair of Abraham's Table of Long Island. We have been operating since December of 2015 in bringing together Long Island Jews, Christians, and Muslims, bring them together in dialogue, and hopefully dialogue that leads to not only understanding, but solidarity. And we're proud of our record. We've had over 25 programs. Our audiences have exceeded 3,000 in total. And we've covered a host of topics in various formats, sometimes as panels, which we're doing today. We've had panels on women in religion. We've had panels on immigrants. We've had panels on the nature of justice and charity, so many programs. We've had live concerts, as our annual Martin Luther King concerts have been produced over the last 2 years. We've had iftar dinners to celebrate the end of Ramadan. So we had 2 programs scheduled for the spring, and obviously the COVID-19 crisis forced them to cancel. One is a program on how we can constructively disagree with one another. And with all of us now stuck in our homes together, that might take on special meaning as we go week after week on top of one another. But that's going to be postponed until the fall. That would have been in March. And in May, we were planning an iftar dinner with a panel on the stresses on the modern family. So we will postpone that as well. So today's program is obviously very timely, and we chose it specifically because we are all concerned about this awful COVID virus and what our faiths can help us, how our faiths can help us to get through this crisis. April is going to be remembered, 2020, for a long, long time. It's been perfectly horrible in terms of the intensification of this crisis and the change in our lives, the incredible rise in unemployment that's been compared to the Great Depression, the fact that we're losing 1,800 people a day, which is over half of what we lost on 9/11, just one thing after another. And April is an unusual time theologically and liturgically because it's a month, this is rare, when Passover and Easter and Ramadan are all occurring in that same 30-day period. 3 holy seasons. And it has occurred to me, and I have said this, celebrating a holy season at an unholy time raises a whole bunch of tough questions. The truth is that each of these holy seasons, Passover for the Jews, Easter for the Christians, and the Ramadan for Muslims, all have an element of suffering and pain and sorrow. But all of them, each of them, has an element of redemption and very especially liberation and hope. So we're going to be addressing both the sorrow and the pain and the hope and the liberation in today's difficult discussion, and it is difficult. There's nothing I enjoy more than reading the New York Times on a Sunday. I did not enjoy it today. Just looking at the headlines in the New York Times, the main story is rising shortage of dialysis units alarms doctors. That's COVID related. There was a 3-page story on what the next 2 years may look like. And the subtitle of the story is "Scientists Foresee a Long Road for the United States." There's a diagram on how 6 feet may not even be enough to separate us from getting the virus. And a front page story on how meat producers are a weak link in the food supply because of COVID, and we may have a meat shortage. So then I went to Newsday, and the headlines were just as bad. At a time when we're looking for leadership, Newsday has an editorial basically saying that our president, Donald Trump, is, quote, rewriting history, quote, with a serial assault on the truth. Just what we don't need at this time. Every day they have a chart of which communities are being hit hardest. And right now, New York State has almost 237,000 cases. Long Island has almost a little over 55,000. And most disturbing, as if the pain and suffering and the sorrow of our brothers and sisters who are African American and Latino aren't enough. When you look at their communities, the cases are exploding. Brentwood today, 2479 cases. Central Islip, 1227. Huntington Station, almost 800. I had a conference call the other night from Huntington Station where we're talking about how to get food to people. People don't have food. So this is a time of terrible suffering. And it's a time when we're going to turn to our faiths for some meaning and some consolation. Last Sunday, I'll conclude with this. Last Sunday, Ross Douthat, who writes for the New York Times, had an editorial, an op-ed, and it was titled "The Pandemic and the Will of God." And in it, he addressed what theologians call the challenge of theodicy. How can you believe in a good and loving God when the world is filled with misery? And basically, he laid out two approaches. And he said, some people of faith say, you know, it's better when you confront something like COVID-19, don't ask the question why, just don't ask it, but respond lovingly and in solidarity with each other and with those who are suffering. But he went on to say, that's not enough. Maybe we should look for what God is telling us and try to discern what God means at a time like COVID-19, maybe so we can change our lives. So he threw that out there. And that's sort of a kind of a context we can use as we get into our program today. First, before we introduce our speakers, I want to give a special thanks to Mehmet Tetik from the Turkish Cultural Center, who's our techo guy and set us up. And I want to point out, if you look in your lower right screen, you will see an opportunity to say something. So we will be taking questions. You can type a question in, it will go to Mehmet, and then he will remove questions that are duplicative and give them to me. So the first part of our program, we will be dealing with our three speakers will be addressing the issues, and then we'll go to your questions. So let me now introduce our speakers. We're very happy to have them back. And I want to say a word about that. Each of our speakers participated in our fall program on gratitude. And it was so good. I recall one minister left and said, I hate to leave the room. And we got into, what does our faith, Jewish or Christian or Muslim, and by the way, they were enormously similar, say about how we can be grateful. But I recall that day that there were questions that came from the audience, which were kind of a prelude to today. Questions like, how can you be grateful at a time like this? The Newsday has some diary entries today of people who witnessed World War II. And one of them was a Dutch people, and one of them was a Dutch man watching his Jewish neighbors being taken away. And he said pretty much what Ross Douthat said and what we're asking today. How can a good God let something like that happen? So with that tough question, let me introduce our panelists. We've welcomed them back. Rabbi Jeff Clapper from Temple Beth El in Huntington, Reverend Kate Jones Cologne from Setauket Presbyterian, and Zuleyha Kolak from the Turkish Cultural Center. So we normally begin with an opening statement, and we do it historically with the oldest religion first. So Rabbi Clapper, I set up some tough questions for you. Where do you want to begin in terms of how our faith traditions are helping us to cope with this adversity?
Thanks, Dick. Really, for laying out such a very not happy message and then toss the ball to us, huh? So look, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to join with this panel again. I really enjoyed it the last time we did it. And hey, if anything, it gave me an excuse to get dressed up because, it seems like been in a lot of comfy clothes Yeah, I am wearing, by the way, nice slacks, not pajama bottoms. That's a nice thing with these Zoom things. It's only what we see on the screen. And actually that thought of what we see on the screen is a good thing. We can see these great pictures, like, I know Zuleha and I have these backgrounds. So sometimes you can lose yourself in a picture like this, or as you and Meg have, it's more the reality, right? The only reason I mention that is because I was thinking about as you were kind of laying out those wonderful headlines from the New York Times. I think there's a part of this that we need to be able to see not just those overwhelming headlines, but also see that there's still some beauty in our world. And that's something, I'm sure we'll kind of bring out in the conversation later. I only mention that because I think that as much as it feels so overwhelming right now, there is a lot of wonderful things that have come out. There's some really positive, incredible, occasions, actions, and things that should hopefully bring us to a little bit of a sense, or a greater sense of hope. And I mention that because I think that that's the thing, when with all of our religions, we can look and see that there certainly are moments of suffering. There's plenty of those, but there also are reasons to be hopeful. So, that's the thing, is to have these conversations in difficult times seems like, how can we even think of good things right now? But I do think that there's a lot of good that we can point to, and I'm just these two amazing people that I'm on this panel with, really having this opportunity again to speak with them. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Okay, Reverend Kate, next chronologically, the Christian perspective.
Well, thank you again for this opportunity. It is really a privilege to be back together in this format. We're all sort of figuring out how to talk about our faiths, how to connect in our faith traditions in this sort of odd technological thing. One of those is that my name says Meg on here, even though that's my 8-year-old daughter, because I can't for the life of me figure out how to change that to my name. So this is just we're all living into this strange just framework for discussing these really deep issues. But thank you to Abraham's Table for figuring out a way for us to do that in this time. One of the things I've just been reflecting on a bit, just as a starting point in this conversation, is how, from a faith perspective, this moment that we're in really requires us to kind of get back to the essentials of our faith in a way. I think, really the kinds of things that I've personally been wrestling with, that I think we're wrestling with as a congregation, are just the basics, the things like, the church is not a building, or how do we love our neighbor? How do we think about what the great stories of our faith traditions mean in sort of the real world? And so when it comes to things like questions about suffering and living in a time when we're confronting that in a very direct and real way, we're returning to those basic stories and questions of our faith, and just wrestling really fundamentally with what those mean, and to some extent with the kind of fundamental question of God's faithfulness and all of that. And so I think that's sort of part of my starting point with all of this is what are those those essential things that we're now being really confronted with, that so often in the day-to-day of living into our living within and into our faith traditions, we often get really wrapped up in kind of doing stuff and operating as an institution or a community. This is calling us back to those essentials and questions. So those are some of the things that I'm just thinking about and pondering as we explore this together.
Thank you so much. And before we go on to Zalea, my apologies. I was holding the phone and I'm getting messages that the phone was bouncing. So I now have it propped. I think that might be better, or at least you won't be getting seasick watching me. So let's go to Zalea now and the Muslim tradition on what you're drawing from this terrible time.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here with you today. And I remember how sweet was our last panel. And at the time, I was lucky to record it, and some of my friends were asking me what happened there. Like, people are talking about it and they're asking. So it was so sweet to talk about gratitude. And I hope that this session will be also, a continuation of that session. So, this is a time that we and our illusionary world is shattered because something is happening out of, nowhere when we were not ready, and we feel that this is something happening haphazardly, as if it's coming from nowhere. We don't know where it comes from. We were not expecting to come to this point, and all of a sudden our whole lives are changed in a way that we didn't expect it to be. And these times, even though it is very challenging, but also it is very inspiring and creative as well, because we need to make that heavy work of asking these daring questions about the meaning and what is the lesson that I can get from here, and if what is the message that I'm receiving through this daunting pandemic that is all over the world. All of a sudden we find ourselves facing with these questions normally we can eliminate or ignore in our lives because there is no pressing issue. We also at times choose to ponder about those questions because there are always something happening in life. There is always something in our plate that that is pressing, small signs that are inviting us to ponder on these questions. So one of the most crucial I think question that we can ask at this point is, what is the purpose, what is the lesson that I can get from this whole situation? Because if we think that there is no point in all this, it's just happening without control, there is nobody controlling it, then the only emotion that we find ourselves is in fear. We find ourselves in such a huge fear as if facing the death. On the other hand, there is, if we think that the whole world is in control of a loving, merciful, compassionate creator, and there has to be a meaning or a wisdom behind all this. And the question then now is, what might be this wisdom that is in all these very challenging questions or situations that we are facing? And our understanding of the creation is not mechanic. We see the whole world that is happening in front of us every day is being created again and again. It's a constant creation from the creator. So we are actually witnessing what is happening every day. Like, most of the time, as human beings, we are stuck in the past or the future. What happened in the past or what will happen in the future. But actually, what we need to ponder and focus on more is the present moment. What is happening now? And what are the signs that is happening in front of me in the creation, inviting me to ponder? So in these times, those signs are very, very loud and clear compared to the other times. And I think we need to stop and ponder, about what is the wisdom, what is the meaning of all these in this constant creation, being created every day from scratch. And it's a dynamic and constant creation, and we are being created every moment. So the possibilities are endless. What are the signs, the messages that I'm receiving now from this creation that is happening in front of me?
So, Zalea, you went right to the second question that Ross Duthout raised
Not
last week.
yet. I'm still in the introduction.
Oh,
Hey,
I thought you were done. Are
No,
you done
no,
with your
no, I
introduction?
was just kidding. I
Oh,
didn't
okay.
go to answer the question.
Yeah,
I was just
yeah,
setting the stage for, going into a deeper perspective.
Yeah. So the idea that God is giving us opportunities to recreate ourselves and our world at every moment is interesting, because that suggests that God somehow is behind this whole mess we're in. And that was kind of what Duthout was saying, that we really should look at what God wanted us to get out of this. So that begs the question that has frankly perplexed me since I was a child, which is, I remember as a 10 or 12-year-old watching newsreels of the Holocaust and thinking as a child, I was in Catholic school at the time, God's supposed to be good. How could he let something like this happen? So we got to go to that question for each of you. Is there a good God that has created this mess we're in?
what-
Maybe we'll go back to Rabbi Klopper. Want to start?
yeah. Dick, as you bring up that question of theodicy, and it's actually a conversation we've had here over the past couple of weeks in Bible study and whatnot, because it begs that question, and look, part of the answer is a theological one, how you see God's role in our lives. Okay?
Right.
And I have to admit, the words that are coming to my mind right now, I admit, are not really mine. They belong to another rabbi, Harold Kushner, who wrote a whole series of books, including When Bad Things Happen to Good People, which was kind of the one that people are most familiar with. And there's a piece that he writes where he explains that when these things happen, it's not a question of is God doing this or not, but the image he raises, which I really love, is the idea that God is crying along with all of us. Okay, that it's not so much for God to do or not do, to change or not change, to make it go away, but in a way to see how we as humans, when these situations occur, and knowing, I love what Zulea said about this, daily creation, right? And even to take it sort of a biblical step, where it says we're all created in God's image, right? So I guess if we are creating God's image, there's an essence of, well, God's in us, we've already got that divinity within us to some extent. And really it's to see, okay, given this situation, how are we as divine, and obviously not deity, but how are we as humanity, let's put it that way, how are we going to respond, right? How are we going to respond to these kinds of moments? Are we going to respond as we imagine, or I would hope would think God would want us to, which is to figure out ways to work together, to help each other, as opposed to this is the moment to just hunker down and be on my own and only care about myself. So to me, it's like that thought again, as Rabbi Kushner says, of God is feeling the same pain, and it's really the responsibility falls upon us to see what are the choices that we're going to make. Whether we could categorize that in a way as what is it that we're going to learn from this, but in a way you don't learn from something until after it happens, when you can sit back and kind of reflect on it. So it's really more of, we're in the reaction stage, so how are we going to react? What are the choices we're going to make? And that's where, in my initial statement, I talk about, You know, my issue with those newspapers is we have heard a lot about the number of cases, which is overwhelming, and in a way means not as much as it seems like it should mean, because what does it mean for those people who have it? Well, they don't talk about the fact that a lot of those people who have it are coming through. You know, they're doing well. They, you know, but instead what we go with, how many have it and how many have died? So it's that image of there's no good to be found here. And I'll tell you, you know, just anecdotally, and then I'll you know, toss the ball. You mentioned how people are struggling for food. Okay, we have continued to encourage people as they can and as safely possible to donate food. Right? You know, if you are doing a grocery run, we invite people, if you can pick up a few extra cans of stuff or whatever, for not for you, but for others, please do. And what's amazing is every day here at Temple Bethel in our donation bin, there's stuff. So people are giving constantly to help others. And I think that that's what I'm talking about, that it's this question of how are we going to react? And I have to say, there are people who are reacting, I think, the way that God would want us to.
So the conference call I was on, Rabbi, earlier this week, about how to get food to people and hungry people in Huntington, several of your congregants were on and played major roles in how to do that, and raised lots of questions about, you know, are we going to be crushed by the private charities trying to do this? But you've kind of come down on the first model that Duthat talked about in his essay last week, which is, I've seen it this way, that God laments with humans at times like this. He didn't create this. He laments with us, and the best we can do is to stand in solidarity and love with one another. But Duthat said, and I'll go to Kate with this now, Reverend Kate. Duthat was kind of saying, you know, that's kind of dismissing the fact that God is an all-powerful God, and maybe he is trying to tell us something here, and maybe this was by design, so we would. And Duthat said, you know, maybe stop being so materialistic, stop being so militaristic, stop being so racist, whatever. So Kate, I'll go to you and that question of, you know, what is God's role here?
Yeah, so I absolutely, I think, am pulled first to this notion of lament and of God's sharing in that, and just similarly, the first example of it, or the explanation, I guess, that I have always held on to is very similar to what Jeff just said, which is, but it was from a sermon by William Sloane Coffin, who lost his son in a car accident and preached after that. And the famous line from that is, you know, when that happened, God's heart was the first to break. And so just a very similar sort of way of framing that God's sharing in our tears. You know, I'm also thinking about, we just came through our Holy Week and Easter, and read some of the scripture passages about the experience of disciples coming to an empty tomb on Easter morning, and being told, you know, women being told, you know, Jesus has gone ahead of you. And so I keep picturing in my mind, in hospital settings, for example, that anyone at the door of a hospital room, that God is already ahead of us there. You know, we're not, whether doctors or nurses or chaplains or whoever, that God is already present in those spaces with people, and sharing in that sort of crisis and moment. But I do think that this question about what this time is exposing, in terms of real issues around things that perhaps God wants us to see, that we don't see as clearly, in times when we're not in crisis, when we're comfortable, when we're taking things for granted. It's a little bit different, I think, than the question of God causing it. But if we're going to put it in theodicy terms, but really a question of how is God helping us to see in the midst of this some things that call us to new ways of being. And so I'm thinking about, obviously, as you pointed out at the beginning, Dick, questions around economic disparity and racial disparity and access to healthcare and all of those things that are being, are being brought to the forefront even more vividly and tragically in this time. Things, our questions about our and the environment and how this is exposing in a way the possibility of humanity to really affect some real change around the way we impact our climate and our planet, and not that calling us to do that, not by sort of going forward, not by stopping everything, but by taking real action going forward to make that kind of commitment that we're now seeing is a possibility for us to do if we work together. So I think there are certainly some lessons and some new callings that come out of this that become exposed because we're in this time where we have a different lens, and that I think God has a hand in helping us to see that.
So before our folks watching take their New York Times and throw it in the fireplace in despair, the last section of the Times that I read is the Sunday Review, and the title is "The America We Need." And it's one essay after another about how we might have a more equitable society after COVID, or we might have universal health care after COVID, or we might work more cooperatively together after COVID. So kind of what you're saying, that out of this, we might change for the better. Zelaya, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, thank you very much. I think it is a very important question that you ask. What is the position, God's position in all this, and how do we situate ourselves in, all these happenings? So first of all, we need to, reconceptualize the world that we live in. Like, we live in a world where there are paradoxes and there are duality, there are contradictions that we face every day, like good and evil, or, day and night, winter and summer, and life and death. We face these concepts every day. So to situate ourselves as human beings in understanding who God is, we are challenged with these concepts to realize that we are in front of an eternal being. We are limited. We are limited with time, space, and our own desires. At the same time, we have this need to know this unseen, eternal, infinite creature, creator, that we need to figure out who he is and what he is doing and what is my role in all of this. So in our understanding, this whole universe with all these dualities are actually presenting us some challenges to actually go beyond and find who God is. So, and also, we live in this world in a temporary time. We are not eternal here, but as a human being, we also have these desires or whims, and we want to be attached to this world, even though we know that we are not going to be here forever. So this these dualities and these challenges, contradictions, if we can call it, actually are inviting us to find who God is. And we know he is eternal, we know he is not like us, and in our understanding, in our faith tradition, it is very I mean, the whole universe, by being created every moment, is actually showing us that somebody is in control, because there is an order, there is this patterns of day and night, seasons, and the beauty that is created in front of us. So, and it also tells us in its own language, in its own manifestation, that we are not here eternally, and we are here for a short time, and there has to be a goal, a purpose in all this, and we are here to perfect ourselves, to become the best version of ourselves, and transform our skills to become the best of us in our capacity. And so that what we learn in this experience, what we get from this experience, we will be able to accomplish the highest human capacity and return to the eternity to meet with our creator. So we are just here on a mission. Actually, we will be living in the eternal world, as this world is showing us some signs of it, with seasons, with day and night, with the signs in the creation. So it is what the world shows us is that we are not here to stay. Like, everything is passing, and when we don't have this perspective of why we are here, right, then we are attached to everything, we are related to everything in the whole world, and everything is passing, and we feel ourselves being with the pain of separation every day. Like, we see the numbers on the news every day. A lot of people are taken away from us, our loved ones, the people. We are connected with everyone in our heart. So it gives us this pain of separation. But when we think about the fact that we are here temporary, and we are being prepared as a human being, we have a responsibility to become the best of ourselves. What is that? What is the what is my duty in all this? What is my job in all this? What is my responsibility in personally, or also collectively as society? So the hereafter is our next step in this whole thing. With this whole happening, we also realize that we need to reconfigure, recalculate, adjust ourselves with the direction of our lives. Where are we going? What are we doing here? So, and the concept of eternity, how we understand it, is the moment that comes after. So actually, we had, since we started talking, we had 38 minutes of our time sent to eternity, hopefully with good vibes. And now we are facing the future, the moment, the present moment, and also the future of our lives. And depending on how we act, what we do, we will send these packages moment by moment to eternity, because once the present moment is gone, we cannot take it back. The past is past. And, it gives us this whole responsibility of what is my duty in all this, and how do I respond to these happenings, in understanding who God is, and in, realizing our responsibility socially, because this is a global situation, and there is so much we could do in all this.
So what I'm hearing from you, if I heard all three of you correctly, is that Ross Duthart kind of made a false dichotomy in that this is an opportunity to, yes, be in solidarity. I don't think any of you believes that God inflicted us with COVID-19. It wasn't a conscious decision, but it's an opportunity. And it was amazing to hear all three traditions expressed in terms of this is an opportunity to be better, to make ourselves better, to weep with God, and in our lamentation, to look at how we're going to be in solidarity and in love and in compassion to one another. That leads, I guess, to a more concrete question, which is, how are each of you coping, and what are you telling your congregations or your fellow believers? What do we do to cope with this? How do we get through it? It's one thing to sort of understand, okay, maybe it's not an avenging God, maybe it's an opportunity, but maybe we'll start again with Rabbi. What are you telling your folks at this time? Because they're weeping. they're frightened. What do you say to them?
I'm just thinking you could throw it to one of the others too to start, but
Still doing it chronologically.
okay. So what's the message? I guess in many ways, I'm feeling like the best message we can send at this point is, I talked about that balance. Judaism talks a lot about balance in life, okay? That we should have measures of all sorts of different things in our lives, not an overabundance of one, but really, and not too much or too little, but balance. So in many ways, I feel like our message that's really needed now has to be the balance to the only message that people seem to be getting, which is, this is horrendous. There's no hope. Again, like I talked about those headlines. So, a lot of our conversation has been about uncertainty, about though not sometimes directly and sometimes indirectly. Look, we're living in a time of fear. And the thing that I feel is, it's not just fear. I feel like we've gotten to a place of fear now. And before now, we were in a place of panic. That was really what was driving everybody's thoughts. That's why people bought mounds of toilet paper, so that now you go to the store and there's not so much, right? It was that panic that first set in. And now as people are recognizing, okay, we're quote unquote okay at this moment, people are still feeling fear, and the message they hear is, you should be afraid. And I think that for us, it's not that we should not, our message shouldn't be, don't be afraid, it's fine. I have to say that I'm horrified when I hear about these people who will go out and maybe this will be, a moment of hate for me, towards me, but the people who are going out and saying, well, open the state, open the country, because I should be able to make the decision for myself if I want to stay at home or not. And to me, what's interesting about that is, I was thinking about this in a context of Passover, right? We just finished the holiday of Passover. And of course, what's the story of Passover? It's our freedom from servitude in Egypt, right? But the thing that at least the Jewish people learned right away, like immediately, right? We get to the other side of the Red Sea after it's parted, and we're already on our way to freedom. And what is it we learn? We learn freedom doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want. Freedom means you have a responsibility as a larger community to live by values, to live by, commandments, mitzvot, guidelines that God has laid down, Moses has given, the Torah, the rabbis, for Judaism, that's sort of the archetype. But it's that sense of freedom doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want. There's a responsibility. So I think it's those two pieces that certainly has been our message of, on one hand, there still is a reason to hope that there is good in our world. There are good people working on this, and there will come a time when life will not be, you're stuck in your home. It may be hard to see it now, but there has to be that message of hope. And as well, the message of, we can't see ourselves as everybody in their own lifeboat, that we are, there's something going viral on Facebook now about how we're not all in the same boat, because all of our boats are a little different, depending upon your situation, your high risk, low risk, whatever. But we are all kind of facing this wave together. And part of it is we have a responsibility. not only take care of ourselves, but to certainly do what we can to care about or for others.
Beautiful. Okay, Reverend Kay, what are you communicating to your congregation?
Yeah, and I think just to pick up on that, what I was saying at the beginning about us kind of getting back to the essentials of what we believe and what we know from our our scriptures, our understanding of who God is. I mean, just fundamentally love your neighbor, right? I mean, if we just, everything that Jeff just said is, how do we love our neighbors? Like we do that by understanding that everything we do impacts those around us. And so we stay home because we love our neighbors, right? We figure out how to feed people because we love our neighbor. We recognize the diversity of experience that everybody is having in this, whether, for some people it's a very slow and kind of, it can be a very lonely time. For other people, it's a very, high demanding, high energy, at work and, in their essential services kind of, it's a very different experience. But if we recognize the diversity of our experience in that way, and yet love one another because we love our neighbors, like that helps us sort of understand who it is that we're called to be in the midst of this and what our responsibility to one another is, how we think about building the beloved community in the midst of this, that kind of thing. And then I think just corollary to that is what we understand about who God is. And that's just, so what I keep coming back to, and I think I'm saying it a lot because it's what I need to hear too, is that God is present and faithful. So there's no part of this experience that God is not present with us. There's no part of this experience in which God has abandoned us. There's no part of this experience that someone is going through alone, because God is right there with them. And so from just a fundamental faith perspective, those I think are kind of the primary messages, and really holding those two things together is what we get if we look at those fundamentals, like the 10 Commandments, that really just talk about how we love God and love one another in a community, and recognizing that throughout the story, whether it's the scriptures or the story of humanity in general, there's always going to be times of wilderness. And that's something we've been talking a lot about as a faith community in the past several weeks, is how do we understand wilderness and what that's like, and what that means for us as we both experience it and look ahead to the other side of it.
I had an opportunity some years ago to ask a prominent Catholic theologian. I was at Catholic Charities at the time. We were having a retreat of some kind. His name was Brian Hare. And I said, what is the Christian definition of love? And he had a one-word answer: service. Service to one another. Saleya, you want to weigh in?
Yes, thank you very much. I totally agree with all that is said so far. And I also believe that it's a time to take responsibility. And when these things started happening in our community, all of a sudden we had this surge of lots of Zoom meetings. Like we were stuck at home, and all of a sudden we were receiving messages from different parts of the world, from Europe, from here, and from other parts, because when you are online, everything is so close. So, it's while, at one point you feel stuck at home and you don't know what to do. You can't even, if you are, if you live in an apartment, it's even, harder. So at the time, these Zoom meetings and, study groups and, lectures, panels like this, it was an opening. It was, this paradox of cave came to my mind. Like, this story of seven sleepers, when there was a difficult time outside, normally outside is light and the cave is dark. But when there is a problem in the outside world, they had to seek refuge in a cave. They had to search for light in the darkness. So this was, this metaphor was similar to our situation when we were stuck in our homes. And all of a sudden, there was this opening to the whole world through these, programs and meetings and lectures where you could actually learn a lot. And, it helps you to reevaluate your own direction, own purpose, and what we can do, and how to take responsibility again, like what to do for the community. And I was so, uh, grateful to see that, a lot of people in our community were searching for ways to help for the, people in need. And, I had some friends who made lists of people to call them. They would arrange some appointments with them for 2 weeks, like, in which day and time you would like to meet and just socialize, because everybody needs socialization. So, this time, this metaphor of seven sleepers, I think, were very much that something that we can relate to. And, when they were isolated in the cave, their isolation was actually a way of opening up to their own connection with God. And, also, maybe we can talk about the Plato's metaphor of cave. How everything that reflects on the walls of the cave is actually a sign and, an attribute or a shadow of the light outside, the sun outside. So these were the issues we talked about. And my favorite one was the story of seven sleepers, to see that paradox of, going into the home in a narrow space, but you find an opening to the whole world to connect and to reconsider, reevaluate your life's purposes.
So thank you to all of you. I'm going to just throw this out, and whoever wants to answer it can. And remind our audience that they can type in questions, and Mehmet will be sending them to me. So I'm waiting for the questions to come through. I think a lot of us remember Jimmy Breslin, the Newsday columnist. He could be very caustic. And years ago, maybe 5-8 years ago, he had a column on Good Friday, and he explained how he lost his Christianity, because when he contemplated how God allowed his son to die on a cross in such an awful way, he couldn't imagine himself doing that to a child, or anyone doing that to a child. And so he abandoned his Christianity. And I think of the Psalms, Catholic Mass has this psalm, every Mass has Psalms. And so many of them are statements of God saying, I will deliver you from your enemy. I will smite them dead. I will take care of you. I will answer your prayers. I will protect you. And I always think of the 6 million Jews probably praying those Psalms and nothing good came of it. So this idea that is God, if we pray to God, will he come in and save us from the virus? Is that a childish thought, or is there some substance to it? Anyone who wants to take that one, good luck.
I don't, but what I do want to do.
I didn't call it this time. That one,
right.
That's too hard.
No, but what I do want to do is actually react to something you said within that. The people who, in the midst of the Holocaust, who prayed the Psalms, right? And what good came of that? Mm-hmm. And here's what I would say. Look, with Judaism, it's hard to be able to talk in singular theology, because different people will read Bible, will react and see God's presence, or for some, lack of God's presence in the world. Okay, so it's hard to paint everybody with the same brush within the Jewish world. But the thing I would say to you is, I think for many of the people who did pray Psalms, it wasn't necessarily with the intention, I will pray this Psalm and God will therefore fulfill it. The reason they prayed the Psalm was that they found comfort and strength in expressing, whether it was expressing those words, being involved in rituals that were, look, rituals for all of us. I think it's safe to say for all of us, rituals are a source of comfort. There's a familiarity, there's a sense of purpose, there's a sense of message and value. For us as in the Jewish community, it's a sense of community. Whether it's, one of the things that's sort of a partial benefit is that, part of our ritual takes place at synagogue, but a lot of it takes place at home. So even if we're not able to be here, you're at home, you can still do those rituals. And a lot of people do because it brings them comfort. And that's the thing is, I think in the midst of terrible times, and look, I do not want to equate what the people went through in the Holocaust with what we're going through now.
Right.
I think it's unfair to try and by the way, it's not just because it's the Holocaust. It's really any experience in life to try and equate, because again, each person's experience is their experience, and to try and say, they all fit in the same box doesn't really, I'm not so sure. But I think again, it's like the people who are turning to faith, and I imagine there are some who are turning to faith because it's the hope that by doing this, God's going to change the outcome or change the world. But I think in the shorter term, a lot of it is, it brings a sense, like I said, comfort, purpose, focus, strength, respite, all these different areas. And I think that's the power in whatever it is that we're able to do. That's why I don't know if Kate and Zuleyha have seen this as well, but ironically for us, we've seen like an increase in the numbers, quote unquote numbers. And you have your we'll stream on Friday night, so we get analytics from YouTube, right? Or we know based on who's on for the Zoom. And I'm telling you, we are getting more people than we might physically do in the actual sanctuary on a regular basis. And again, I think it's because people are looking for that, whether it's the sort of normalcy or the faith or the strength or the comfort or the connection with others. But I think that's what these rituals do.
Anybody else? Kate, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think, my response to your overall question is just, God is mystery. Really, I think, if any of us had that answer, we would, perhaps we wouldn't need God because we would have all the answers. But God is mystery and we are not God, and that's the bottom line. God is God and we are not. And so there are questions that I think we just cannot answer. I think when it comes to prayer, there's this similar sort of mystery in what happens in prayer that is very much about it changing us and as Rabbi Klopper said, comforting us and strengthening us in a way that is somehow the connection that happens between us and the divine in prayer, allows and enacts that. And at the same time, this mystery that God does have power that we don't understand, and how prayer um, how prayer, I don't know, it's hard to even say, but there is something that I think prayer has the capacity to move and change God in this way that we don't understand either. So there's just a lot of, prayer is so important because it actually allows us to participate in a way in that mystery that we can't quite explain, but that we know is no less real just because we can't explain it. And I think the other thing is that this sort of gets at the question of connection between between all of us within a faith community, right? I mean, one of the things that we're experiencing in this trying to figure out how to do worship and do community and everything in a time when we can't physically be together are just these questions about connection and how we, what it means to have those relationships among one another when we can't be physically present with one another. But we're all discovering that there are these ways that we can, spiritually support one another, find that sort of relationship with God in a way that exists outside of our buildings, which we have such important and meaningful ties to, and so sort of entering in again to the mystery of that just relationship among one another and what those ties mean. And we express it in different ways. I might call it, in the context of our community, like the body of Christ, but it all is the different ways we explain the same thing, which is how does our faith connect us in our understanding of what happens within those relationships. So lots of just mystery as far as I'm concerned about all of it.
It plays out in real behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, Zelaya.
Yes, thank you. The concept of prayer is really important to understand because there are different kinds of prayers. So first of all, the goal of our life here in our understanding is to be able to connect with the Creator all the time, like to realize that we are in His presence all the time and to connect with Him in the best way. So, and the types of the prayers are, some prayers are verbal prayers. We just, recite certain sections of the, Revelation, the books, or sometimes it's our actions, to search for a cure of a health problem for the researchers, for the doctors is a prayer. They search for the, the cure, the medicine, let's say. And their actions when they spend time in the lab is also a form of prayer. And we also, pray through our potential. When we realize our potential, it's a form of prayer as well. And what is the essence of the prayer is that we realize that there is something that we are, not powerful. We are, we don't have the strength, we don't have the power, we are impotent, and we don't know the answer. We need something and we can't get it. And, in our tradition, there is a verse. It says that, what importance would you have if you didn't have your prayers? So the whole concept of being important in the eyes of God is, on our shoulders to connect with Him. When we are connected, when we realize the whole reality, the truth, and His, what we are doing here, and connect with Him is, we actually actualize our importance. We become important in our, in actualizing our potential. And another verse says that, pray to me that I will respond. I will answer to your prayers. So in this case, the question is, most of the time we pray, but they are not answered. So how do we understand that? And, the answer to this one is that, it's like going to a doctor as a child and, saying to the doctor that, I'm sick and I need this medicine, please give it to me. And the doctor would give an exam to the child and say that, either the same medicine that we are asking for, the doctor might give it, or he might give a better one, or he might tell us, as a little child in this metaphor, you don't need any medicine. You're just fine. You just, continue doing, these sort of things. And, sometimes the answer of the prayer is not giving an answer. It's just, we just need to be in that position for some other, wisdom. And sometimes it's just given to us, but we are here. Our role here is to seek, to, search for the answer. And so sometimes we want something, but that is not good for us, but we really want it like a child. We insist that we want that, but it is not good for us. Like, we don't know. Sometimes we act like a child. We don't know the results of our actions. So sorry. Sometimes we need to realize that, maybe what we are asking for at the moment, we need, there is some lessons that I need to learn, and it is not given to me right now, but it gives me a responsibility, either through my actions, through my verbal prayers, or, seeking for the, medicine as a doctor. It's all kinds of prayers, and we need to be responsible in realizing and understanding the wisdom behind it. The gist of it is that we understand that we are impotent. We are not powerful. There is a power, beyond us that we connect with. And this is an opportunity to connect with him. And the time of sickness, for example, most of the people are inflicted with this, pandemic. And the time of sickness actually is a form of worship, because there are two kinds of worship. One is affirmative, like you do prayers or fasting, you take an action. And the other one is negative. It's like you're not doing an action, but just being in a position that you realize your vulnerability. In itself, it's a worship. In itself, it makes you realize who your creator is. So it's just being in that position makes your life, more fruitful in understanding your true reality. So this neediness and vulnerability at times is itself is a form of worship.
So what I'm hearing from each of you is that this time of grief and sorrow is a time for us to grow in service, grow in love, grow in who we are as humans. I'm going to ask we're going to go to some questions now, but I'm just going to ask maybe a quick response to this. For those who are really afraid, and that's all of us, is there any point to asking God to spare us from getting the virus? Is that prayer appropriate?
I mean, think about it, first of all, from what comes from our own being. I mean, the first reaction all of us has as human being is to try to protect us from getting take the precautions. So that tells us in itself, that tells us something, that we all need that prayer. We all need those type of actions, taking the precautions, being careful about what we are doing. That's also a form of prayer. I mean, this is something I think.
But is there a God who's going to make that decision? If I pray enough, I'll be spared the virus.
That is a hard question to ask, because prayer, the purpose of prayer is not to get the results. Like in a time of drought, the purpose of prayer is not to get the rain. It's to connect with him in a way that we understand it in a better way. Like the time of sickness is to get to know him through his attribute which we learn as healer. He is the healer. So he is the, powerful. He is the authority. So these are opportunities for us to communicate with him in knowing these attributes.
Kate, what do you say? If we pray enough, will we be spared the virus?
Yeah, so I think you asked two different questions. So I just want to answer both. The first was, is it appropriate to pray that? And I think the answer to that is yes. I mean,
Okay.
otherwise we have to throw out the book of Psalms, because it's like every one of those prayers is, please do the,
Yeah, help me out.
And I think that's perfectly appropriate. I mean, we all pray for that for ourselves. We pray for that for our world. We want to see the end of suffering, and that is our constant prayer, whether it's personally for somebody we love, for our neighbors, for the world. In terms of the second question, which is, it does it if you, and I'm going to maybe flip it a little bit, but if you don't pray hard enough, if you don't get spared from the virus, does that mean that you did not pray hard enough? And I would say that is not something that I believe. I don't believe that it's a lack of good, hard, persistent prayer that is why bad things happen to people.
Jeff?
Yeah, along the lines of kind of what's been said, here's what came to mind. A lot of praying going on, especially for the parents who are homeschooling their kids in a way. All of us who have parents with kids at home trying to go over things. And of course, one of the bigger challenges for many is math, right? Our kids who are now, I feel very lucky. My college age kid is home and he's studying math. So when there are big math questions for an 8th grader, he goes to the college kid, which is perfect. My prayer was answered, I guess you could say. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think one of the problems is people will often think of prayer or approach prayer in a mathematical formula, okay? A plus B equals C. A, if I say the prayer, plus B, God does everything, equals C. So C being, then therefore I should get what I'm praying for, in a way. And I think the one thing we know in religion is mathematical principles don't necessarily apply, which is why it's not math, right? It's a lot more of spirituality, emotional, psychological, prayer and all that. It's not that mathematical formula. So I completely agree that I would never say to somebody, you can't say that as a prayer. The interesting thing is, and I think this applies in just about all religious faiths, but Judaism talks about there are 2 different types of prayer. There is what I guess I would call the liturgy. Those are the words that are written down and we're all going to say because that's the way it works, whether it's I certainly have seen in Muslim prayer, there are the words in Arabic, right? Allah, I'm not even going to try because I will not pronounce them well. Same thing in Christianity and same thing in Judaism. There are the prayer blocks that we do, but there also is this that's what we call in Hebrew keva. It's the set prayer. But there's also kavanah, which is kind of like the moments of intention when we just let our heart say whatever our heart wants to say. And if people are feeling that that's the prayer they want to say, then that's what they should say. I think the challenge becomes then that in my mathematical formula, the equals is your expectation. So it can't be an expectation of if I say this, then I'm going to get my reward, which is God doing what I'm asking. It's that sense of prayer is our opportunity to express. And we even, we'll certainly encourage people to pray to God, whatever words come to mind. Could be a dialogue, could be a question, could be, we'd like to believe that you could be angry with God, that things are not going the way that you would hope. And God can again, it's that sense of God can hear those words, if we could use those kinds of humanistic terms. You know, God hears them, and then God's I love the way that was put. God's heart was the first one to break.
Yeah.
So I think it's not a sense of saying to people, there's a prayer, what you say is not okay. It's no, prayer is your opportunity to express the words that help you connect, that help you kind of release and even get a better sense of what's inside.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Thank
I
you
would
all.
like to add one more point, which is, you know, we need to understand prayer in multiple ways. So if we are praying, God, please save us from this pandemic, that is a verbal prayer. But at the same time, we also have the responsibility of quarantine ourselves, right? Not going outside or, you know, interacting with other people. That's also a prayer. And, you know, when you take the responsibility and do the prayer with your actions, it's most of the time, 95% of the time, it's accepted. Because, you know, prayer is two-faceted concept. So what you say actually motivates you to take the action. So if I'm aware that I don't want to be, you know, inflicted with this pandemic, I pray with verbally, and I also take the action. And as long as we are careful and we quarantine ourselves, you know, it's most of the time accepted, isn't it?
That's a beautiful image, that the isolation is a form of prayer. Beautiful.
Mhm.
We have some questions, so I'm going to pop the questions, as they say. And the first one is, do you think that the social restrictions imposed by the virus will have an effect on communal services in the future? Who wants to take that one?
Yes. I would
think
say yes. I think the question is sort of how long into the future, I guess, is one part of that. But I think we're all going to have to really do some thinking about what it looks like to go, you know, back to normal after this, and wrestle with the reality that that's not going to happen instantly. And so there are going to be some sort of steps that we have to take, I think, along the way that will be incremental in how we reform as an in-person community. Even though I really firmly believe we're still a community, you know, even when we're not in person. And I think there's inevitably going to be, and in some ways I hope there will be some real self-reflection as faith communities about, you know, who it is that we're on the other side, who it is that we are on the other side of this, and what is sort of the root of our communal life together that is the most important to get back to, and what does that look like? And so, you know, you always want to be in constant self-reflection about that, and not just go back to doing things the way you were doing them just because that's the way you were doing them, but really emerge out of this in a way that asks those questions, I guess.
Yeah, beautiful. Rabbi,
Well,
you see change and
yeah, well, there are two thoughts that are running through my mind with this question. One is, you know, I think within the context of my community, and what's kind of ironic in a way is, before this all hit, we had already instituted streaming services because we had recognized that there were people who, for whatever reason, couldn't be here in person, and we wanted to, using the technology, reach out. So we had already started to stream our main Friday evening service on a fairly regular basis, like 3 out of 4 weekends, 4 out of 5 weekends a month, which was great because it meant that when this all hit, we could hit we were already running, so we could hit the ground running, and we've actually gotten better at it because of that. So, look, in a way, it's like it was already sort of in the works. At the same time, the one thing that I try to, in a way, I guess for my own sanity and managing, any anxiety, is to say, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how this is going to turn out. And that's the thing is, in a way, it's like to try and mire through or wade through all the different studies and headlines and whatever. It's this sense of, look, we don't know. I'll reflect on. I recently had an interesting conversation with my community over Zoom, and I asked the question: so if tomorrow the authority, like Governor Cuomo said, guess what, everyone, it's safe. You can come out May 15th, because that's the state's closed until May 15th or on pause. How many of you would on May 15th open your doors and walk out? And it was interesting with that group, very few. They were still saying, well, we would want to see if it's really okay to go out. So I think there's just so much uncertainty that rather than trying to predict, this is what we're going to do and this is what we're going to look like, the message is we're going to figure it out, and it's going to take some time, and it's going to change, and we're almost kind of in a day-to-day, 2-day at a time, maybe window, and that's okay. And I think, for people who like to know what's going to happen down the road, like to schedule, like to organize, that's really uncomfortable. But I think it's the better place for us to, it's where we are. We don't know. So rather than trying to guess, just say, we're going to figure this out and we'll do it together.
Paul, I saw this morning, I think 73% of the American people are afraid we're going to move too quickly to end the isolation. Zalea, you want to add anything to that about the future worship in the Muslim tradition?
Actually, this is a very important question for us, because in a week we will have Ramadan coming up. So we started in this, 2 months before Ramadan, there is a special time that we prepare for Ramadan. So now on April 23rd will be the first day of Ramadan. So, this period of isolation for us was a good opportunity to, work on our connection with the Creator and, have intense, faith lessons and, groups, study circles and, things like that. So actually, one thing that came out is something really important was to care for another and to check on each other. So, and to keep the spirit of community, even if we cannot be together for the Friday prayers, but we can still connect. So some, mosques stream their, sermon online. So people were able to connect and, strengthen their faith. And so one way of coming out of this thing, of this whole issue in a more, in a stronger way, is to be service oriented, rather than, sitting here and thinking about complaining about the situation, finding ourselves some activities that we can do, even if it is something, calling someone, asking their help, giving them psychological support, finding ways to help remedy other people would actually heal, help us heal as well. So right now for Ramadan is an intense time of connection, and we actually celebrated like with breaking the fast every evening. We won't be able to do it now, but at least in spirit we can be connected and try to feel it as much as we can.
So the Abrahamic definition of love is service. That's what I'm hearing from the three of you. I'm going to combine two questions. One is, how do we retain our values at this terrible time, and particularly a concern that fear is going to overtake us in so many ways. Who would like to start with that one? How do we retain who we are as believers, and particularly in a climate of fear that may persist for a long time?
It's already overtaken us, so I don't think it's something that we can anticipate will happen. The fact that people don't leave their homes is not out of a sense of joy and relaxation. It's really, we're kind of living with this prevalent fear. So I think we're already there. And I think that it's, look, for some people, maybe they've figured this out, come up with their patterns, come up with, their daily routines or what they're going to watch on Netflix to escape. It's, it's a work in progress. We're all a work in progress. And I think, what is it going to take? It's just going to take people taking a deep breath and committing themselves to the values that each of our faiths stands for, as opposed to allowing the fear to be the bus driver, is to try and let the values, it's hard, I know, but to take that deep breath and recognize we actually all are better suited when we let the values drive the bus rather than the fear.
I like what you said earlier, Rabbi, that we've gone from panic to fear, and that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And maybe fear to service and caring and
right.
And getting out of ourselves. Kate, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that other than just a little kind of reflection on the fact that living in fear isn't new, and it's especially not new for a lot of communities that have been experiencing a climate of fear for a while now, that outside of the context of this virus. And so I'm just mindful of the fact that I am always speaking from a place of privilege, where fear is not something that I experience on a regular basis. And so, but for many people it is, because, they're in places where violence is a regular part of their daily life, or because they're concerned about their immigration status, or because they interact in a different way with law enforcement, or they worry about where their next meal is coming from. And so fear is certainly not a new phenomenon because of this virus for many folks. And so I guess I'm just kind of naming that.
Well said.
Interesting. So those of us who are experiencing fear now, maybe a deeper fear than we normally experience, might be a little more empathetic to people who experience it all the time. Yeah. Leah?
Yeah, I mean, at a time of crisis like this, the differences among the human beings are lost. So we don't see each other as, certain labels of faith. We just see each other as human beings, and we can connect through our vulnerabilities. And, this is a great opportunity for us to embrace our vulnerability as human beings and to, reconnect. And fear is given for a purpose. It's not for no reason. I mean, fear is for us to realize that there is a danger and to protect ourselves. So if we didn't have the fear, we couldn't isolate ourselves at homes, right? So it does serve us for a purpose. And the only thing is that we shouldn't stay in that mode of, being for so long. Rather, protecting ourselves, taking precautions, and then, being open to be surprised, being open, to the new situations rather than being, stuck with the feeling of uncertainty. I mean, there are so many things in life we don't know anyways. Like, this is another time that we need to, we need to recreate the connection of trust with the creator. Like, there will be an opening. This is just an opportunity to grow, and we trust that, just like, God is the healer, God is the one who creates this virus as well. So whoever created this virus will also give us the healing, so the cure will be given too. So actually, in our understanding, it's the same source. The created power comes from God. Based on our actions, yes, we have the responsibility, but at this time, I mean, it relieves me to think that whoever gave me this virus also gave me the cure, will give me the cure. So it's just my job to be open and, trusting to God and doing my part in a responsible way.
So I'm hearing the three of you returning to the topic of gratitude that we discussed in the fall, and that amid all of this, there are opportunities to be grateful and to grow as people and to be more in service to one another and to make the world better. And while maybe God didn't throw COVID-19 at us, it's an opportunity. I'm hearing each of you say that. Am I right on that? It's an opportunity
It's an
for all of us.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, all challenges in life are an opportunity. And again, it's up to us to choose how we respond to those moments. And hopefully, this is a moment when, as much as it's a challenge for humanity, we have the ability, and we've seen it, we have the ability to just step up and meet the challenge, and hopefully be able to take care of everyone, and get through this challenge together.
So what makes a person of faith different from someone else? And what I'm hearing is our faith would look at adversity and say, what are we going to do to make this a better world? What are we going to do to make ourselves better? What are we going to do to help someone? And that's something to be grateful for. That's something to be grateful for. I'm going to combine one last question. Then maybe each of you could give us some parting words of what you would like us to take away from this difficult discussion. I mean, I really laid it out as we opened the program with some pretty grim information, and I feel much better right now than I did an hour and a half ago. But here's the final question. If our purpose is to please God, how do we please God at a time like this? I think the answer is service. But someone else asked, what do you think of those religious leaders who are saying, to please God, we must come together in community and congregations and be together at this time and not isolate ourselves? And there are religious leaders who are saying that.
I mean, my first reaction is that this is against what science tells us. So, we cannot come together. I mean, if I would suspect that this is a responsible invitation, because, it's very obvious that, we need to be in isolation to protect ourselves. So I would, be suspicious of their sanity.
Well, one of them actually died from the COVID-19 virus. One of the ministers who said, let's keep the worship services going communally. Anyway, anybody else want to comment on that?
I just think, fundamentally, we're just called to figure out the best way to love one another. And I think for most of us right now, what feels like the way to do that is to protect and take care of one another. And that means we do everything that we can to keep each other safe. And obviously for a lot of folks, that's who are out in the on the front lines at hospitals, or who are essential workers, they are sacrificing tremendously so that we all have the comfort to stay at home and be taken care of. And so I think my faith would tell me that our responsibility in return is to do absolutely everything we can, to protect them, to protect, our neighbors who are at risk, in whatever way that is. And I just wanted to say one more thing about sort of the gratitude piece, and the notion that we, can learn or grow from that. I think that's absolutely true. I think we, we always, in these kinds of times, become more aware of those good things in our lives and the beauty around us. I think we're all drawn to nature right now in a really profound way, because it just illuminates for us goodness in a way that sometimes we take for granted, and we're able to see that somehow in a new way because of how special it seems in this context. But at the same time, I always hesitate about that line where we suggest that people who are suffering or going through suffering, that it's a learning experience for them. And so there's always that fine line when we talk about gratitude, that we want to be careful we're not suggesting that, what you're going through is going to be good for you. Because of course, what a lot of people are suffering and dealing with right now, it's not to learn something, it's just because it's awful. So.
But there is goodness. My neighborhood is not the friendliest, and I often don't even see my neighbors. And during this crisis, I've been taking walks in the neighborhood. I usually do, but I notice now people are out. I see fathers playing with their kids that I've never seen before. I saw a family the other day, the two teenage girls, mother and father, and there was real affection between them as they walked. And most importantly, I see people greeting me. Typically, in this neighborhood, for some reason, when you walk, you just walk. But I see smiles, and there's a spirit I haven't felt since 9/11, frankly, of community. Jeff, you want to conclude on this idea of fear and what's our purpose of worshiping God? And
well, yeah, what came to mind as I was listening to you lay out sort of the last thought was, in Judaism, we love to parse language, look at what the language says and kind of play with it, be critical of it, all these kinds of things. So two reactions. The first is, Dick, you mentioned the phrase, please God, right? We need to please God. And I have to tell you that one of the things I really appreciate is there's been a lot of wisdom that's saying, look, it's not about being happy, because we can't always be happy. We're touched by sadness, some people more so than others, but we're touched by sadness and all this. So it's unrealistic to think that we're going to be happy 24/7. And even as you look at the Bible, just as a narrative, God isn't always happy. We don't always do the right thing. So to me, it's not about pleasing God. Like we're not. It's not about making God happy, and then everything will be okay. It's us living up to the path that God has put in front of us. And that's a nice thing, is for each of us in different faiths, the path is a little different. Maybe the expectations are somewhat similar, certainly parallel, but it's not about making God happy. It's about living up to those expectations, living a life that follows that path. And I do think that is a huge difference.
Yeah.
But the other thing I was thinking about is when you said, the people are saying, well, we have to come together, right? So what does that mean, come together? Well, the people who will take it in the form of, it means you have to be in the same physical space. Well, yeah, you're going to have a problem if all you can do is define it as being in the same physical space. As a Jew, so much of my mindset is community-based. One of the great rabbis long ago, Hillel, said one of the most important principles is don't separate yourself from the community. You should see yourself as an important part of community and be involved with community. So when we say come together, what should that mean? Well, it doesn't have to mean necessarily being physically in the same space. Another way to put it is we should be unified. We should, or even easier as a way to think of it is we need to work together. And the one thing we certainly have learned is to work together in this world now. How blessed are we that we don't have to be in the same space? You know, technology does give us the opportunity. You know, there are people in business who are using Zoom, and that's how they're working together. Okay, there are other means for us to be unified and to work together, even from the, I don't want to use the word isolation, but from the quarantine of our own homes, of having to remain in our own homes. Because I think part of it is fighting that sense of isolation. And that's where community comes in. That's where the phone calls absolutely come in. That's where the Zoom comes in. That's where whatever means that we have to put prayer online, you know, people, I wonder, or at least this is what we've heard, they feel connected. They feel that strength. So in all these things we're doing, using the tools of technology that we have are means for us to still be able to come together, to be unified, to work together, to get us all through what is a really challenging time in our world. And, you know, I'm grateful for the community I have, for the communities like Abraham's Table, for all the work that's being done in the community to feed those who are food insecure, to care for those who are, you know, and our thoughts go out to all those who are ill, you know, and the families who are dealing with loved ones they can't be in the same space with, but are finding ways to connect with them. So, you know, again, the message is there's a lot of good in our world right now that's come out from a terrible situation. And that should be our focus, is to say that, isn't it amazing that people are giving of themselves? Isn't it incredible that that we are working together? You know, here we are, the four of us on this Zoom. You know, this is just one little instance of so many other things that are happening. It's still, to borrow the words that aren't mine, it's still a wonderful world.
Yeah, that was one of the songs last night in the Who concert. It's a wonderful world. It was a very powerful moment. So I'm going to ask our viewers. I think we had 40 coming on. It probably grew. You've all received an email from me announcing this program, and you can respond to it. So the Abraham's Table Planning Group would be really interested in hearing what you thought of today's program. So you have an opportunity to email me and tell me what you thought, what was good, what we could do better. This is the first time we've done it, and any feedback at all. So a final word from each of you. Since our flyer had the word hope on it, so maybe brief statement of hope to our participants. This was a wonderful community opportunity. So the statement of hope.
Thank you so much. I think this was a great opportunity and great invitation for all of us to ponder one more time about what we are going through and finding the meaning. And I think it gave me a lot of hope to see that in different communities, different faith traditions, we are in the same, we are meeting in the same ground where we embrace each other and support each other, find healing in each other. So there is also, I think, we need to reference, there is a possibility of joy in all this, finding the meaning, learning the lessons and doing our responsibility, acting responsibly in all this. There is a great joy for one to take responsibility and help others, because this is the ultimate reward one can get, to feel that you actually made an impact to someone else's life. So
It's
thank you
interesting
very
you
much.
say that. It's interesting you say that, Slay, because I was just thinking that I've enjoyed this program and I felt guilty about it, but that's that's really profound. Kate, you want to give us a sense of hope?
Yeah, no, I think that's really what I was kind of focusing on, which is that the opportunity that we have to have these kinds of exchanges and these sorts of conversations is a real joy. And I think one of the things that this particular moment in time has taught us is just how connected we are across humanity. And that has become just so rapidly evident in a very, tangible and scientific way. But I hope, my hope is that what that leads to is us recognizing that connection in a deeper and more positive way going forward, which is that we all depend on one another. We all, share this planet with one another. We all experience these things together, and therefore on the, as we experience them and as we move forward out of this into, whatever the world looks like on the other side is living into that common humanity and that connectedness with one another in a really positive and way that builds one another up, instead of all this nonsense where people want to tear each other down. I've talked or thought about the word longing a lot in the midst of this. Like we, are longing to be together again. We're longing for our friends and our loved ones. We're, longing for the opportunity to be back in spaces that are meaningful and joyful for us. And so I think that's also, there's a lot of hope in that in that longing is this desire for human relationship that if we really work hard at it and we take it seriously and we think about what God intends for that, that longing can be something that really is powerful and transformative for the world.
Pope Francis said, I think it was around Good Friday, that the COVID-19 has wounded us, but that an open wound is an opportunity to look inward and for healing, and to also look outward for healing. Beautiful. Rabbi, you want a final word of hope?
Yeah, so two quick things. One is there's an old Jewish story, and I'm just going to cut to the end of it. The punchline or the moral of the story is, the motto of the story is, this too shall pass. Okay. Now it's actually a double-edged sword in some ways, because the story speaks to, on one hand, when we're feeling intense joy, we don't often remember, but we find out really quickly that those moments of intense joy are fleeting, and then things can change right away, and real life seeps back in, or something happens to ground us again. But in this case, it's that sense of the converse, right? The opposite. When we're in the midst of something awful, it's a reminder that even as bad as this seems, and for some people, this will, and really for all of us in a way, it changes all of us, and again, whether it's because you have felt grief or are feeling grief right now, or just, for whatever reason, yes, there might be changes, but this too shall pass. There's an element of, we will be okay. We will survive. We will get through this together. And adjacent to that, or a big part of that is, part of my hope is aside from being an optimist and believing that we will work together, and there are already great minds, scientific minds who are working on this, worldwide. But one of my hopes is that we really start to, in a way, reevaluate the word, or the meaning of the word hero, because one of the things hopefully we're all seeing is we've got a boatload of heroes all around us. And they're not the people with the most money or the most material things. They're those people who are going and working at the hospital every single day. They're the EMTs. They're the grocery store workers and the restaurant workers and the people, the essential workers, you know, that we don't even know about, but they get up every day and do what's needed for the rest of us. You know, we've got teachers who we now really recognize, you know, the blessing of what a teacher taking our kids in their classroom means. So I think that, you know, as we move past this, beyond this, whatever word you want to use, is to see that, first of all, there are incredible people there are so many more of these incredible people than we ever realized. And I really like the point about how we have lived in many ways in a time of fear, some more, some less perhaps, but before the virus, there still was a good amount of fear in our world. And
Yeah.
hopefully we move to a place where we see we are surrounded by goodness, by compassion, by loving neighbors that we might not have ever known before, but now we meet them in the streets. There's a lot of good in our world. And I'm looking forward to just the opportunity to even embrace it more when we can get closer than 6 feet.
Thank you. And by the way, some of our heroes are among the lowest paid people in our workforce. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. So we end this program. I just cannot thank each of you enough. This has been absolutely marvelous. And the commonality between the Jewish and the Christian and the Muslim responses is just amazing. I mean, our Abrahamic roots and our commonality really came through. And each of you was delightful and profound. And just, I'm leaving this feeling a lot better than I did reading the New York Times 3 hours ago. So God bless you. And to our audience, go to your email for me and let us know what you thought of the program. Thank you all very much. Have a
Thank
good
you
evening
very
and
much.
stay well. Please
Thank
stay
you
well.
very
Be
much.
safe,
bless.
everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
take
you.
care.